So thank you all for coming. It's been a real pleasure being able to work with this collection and curate selections from it for the Anatomy of Disquiet. When I was given the opportunity by Pauline to curate something, instead of coming up with a concept or an overarching theme, I decided on a lens, and a lens that is which Jungian analysis and thought. And I didn't know a whole lot about it going into it. I'd kind of been privy to the basic ideas and tenets of Jungian ideas and thoughts. But I decided to consult with a Jungian analyst who is here tonight. This is Dr. Ronald Schenk. He's a Jungian analyst who practices and teaches in both Dallas and Houston. His interests focus on clinical training, cultural psychology, and postmodernism. He is currently president of the Council of North American Societies of Jungian Analysis and author of The Soul of Beauty, Dark Light, The Sunken Quest, and American Soul. So what we're going to do this evening is a bit atraditional, both in form and content, hopefully. I'm going to give brief introductions to the artworks, and then Dr. Schenk is going to lead us through how Jungian thought kind of informs the artwork. Jung famously said that the psyche, the soul, is composed purely of images. So when I was approaching this curation, I was looking solely at the images and not trying to judge them by art historical relevance, historical content, or making any direct affiliations between one thing and the other than those that come out that are kind of immediately recognizable, whether it's conceptual content, figurative words, books. All these things kind of echo throughout. So we're going to begin in the courtyard. Luckily, it's a nicer evening than it was morning. We're going to start with this wonderful sculpture by Thomas Hausago, Boy 3. And it is from 2012. It's a bronze with white patina. And as you can see, as you walk around the sculpture, you can see how the wonderful wood shims that are here at the hips and the waist, and the kind of the additive qualities of like typical sculptural ways of working. But yet, when you actually look at the insides, you can see where the casting concerns come to play, and there's rebar, and there's this beautiful line that goes all the way up and down the legs and up into the head where it kind of pushes forward. So with that in mind, I saw this as kind of almost the beginning of the provocation. A looming figure is when you open the door that is pushing you to go into the exhibition, and kind of bookending that with the Urs Fischer work, Naked Arrest. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Schenk.
I'm Ron, everybody. I am a Jungian analyst, but what I have to say about the work will probably be a surprise to anybody else who considers themselves to be a Jungian analyst. Those of us who are Jungians all have our own kind of take on the psyche, and what I'll be giving you is my take on the psyche based on a wide range of sources, both from the field of psychoanalysis, which is my field, Freud and Jung, but also from philosophy and literature and art as well. So my job tonight is to give the psychological background to the pieces of art that we're going to be seeing. Now let me start off by saying that there's going to be several themes that we have tonight. One of the main themes, is dialogue. Brandon has set up the pieces so that there is an inherent dialogue between different pieces, and he and I are going to be dialoguing, and I'm hopeful that we can have a dialogue with you all. So questions, comments, answers are all very welcome in this dialogical event that we're going to be having tonight. The second theme that I want to introduce by being out in the sculpture garden and being around a sculpture is this is going to be a four-dimensional event. We're going to be talking about worlds, W-O-R-L-D-S, worlds, and in our talking about the psyche and how each piece of art evokes a kind of world around it, a space that we are in. Jung said that the soul is mostly outside of the body, so that when we think of soul, we're going to be thinking in terms of how, for example, how pieces of art are actually serving us, and they have their own subjectivities. They have their soul, and we are in dialogue with their soul. So, more on what we mean by the word soul. What do we mean by that? It's an undefinable term. It has, but it's been used throughout our tradition to signify essence, to signify source, to signify something like the unmoved mover, that which moves us. It is made up of paradoxes, so that, for example, one definition of soul from the Renaissance is the soul is like a circle, the center of which is everywhere, the circumference nowhere. So as soon as we start in the mode of soul, as soon as we start talking about one aspect, something, we immediately are evoking its opposite or another aspect. And when we talk about words in some of the text art, for example, we're going to be talking about how words themselves inherently have their own subjectivity and history and their own counterpoint within the actual word. So there's going to be a lot of what we're going to be focusing on tonight is how, not only how the objects of art are in dialogue, but how they are showing how things that seem to be outside of that world are actually within that world as well, from the standpoint of the other art pieces with which they're in context. Now, the language of so there's paradox. Soul, another aspect of soul that is part of the title of this work tonight, Disquiet. Another part of the soul is that the soul takes pleasure in downward movement, in descent, in getting down below the surface, in getting into darkness, in getting into the swamps, in getting into the rubble. I mean, we have these phrases in music, for example, let's get down to the real nitty-gritty. That is, that's an essential part of soul, again, which we'll be seeing not only in all of these pieces, but especially, most prominently in different pieces, like when a figure is diving down, that is an aspect of soul, as opposed to spirit, which is traditionally an upward movement or an ascendant movement. A movement up and above, where soul gets down into it. And so you'll see that these objects of art, all of them, in some way are getting down into it. Now, the language of soul is, we can't, soul is difficult because we are used to either talking in a very materialistic way that is oriented towards reality, or a spiritual way that is oriented towards abstraction. But soul encompasses both. Soul encompasses everything. It's between spirit and matter, and it encompasses spirit and matter. So the language, what kind of language can we use to express soul? Well, as Brandon said, that what the soul expresses itself through image. But image is not just a picture on the wall. Image is a world in and of itself, a world that gets evoked, that has its own life to it. And the movement of image is imagination, that which has some reality to it, but also some fantasy to it. So that, again, that idea that soul encompasses all sides of things. It's a separate reality in and of itself. Finally, soul is process-oriented. It has to do with essence, that which is always there, but it also has to do with change, a constant change. Heraclitus said, you can never step in the same river twice, and that is the manner of soul, that there is always, soul has to do with movement. And so part of what the way I'll be talking about these paintings is through mythology, through alchemy, which is a traditional form of practice that brings about change in the world, and we'll talk more about that. Mythology, alchemy, and art and literature as well.
So I'm going to read this wonderful poem that Dr. Schenk sent to me the day before yesterday by Adrian Rich, which is entitled Diving into the Wreck. And as you see, there's a lot of imagery, a lot of words that float in and out of the exhibition, which you've been looking at. Diving into the wreck. First, having read the book of myths and loaded the camera and checked the edge of the knife blade, I put on the body armor of black rubber, the absurd flippers, the grave and awkward mask. I am having to do this not like Cousteau with his assiduous team aboard the sun-flooded schooner, but here alone. There is a ladder. The ladder is always there, hanging innocently close to the side of the schooner. We know what it is used for. We know who have used it. Otherwise, it is a piece of maritime floss, some sundry equipment. I go down, rung after rung, and still the oxygen immerses me, the blue light, the clear atoms of our human air. I go down. My flippers cripple me. I crawl like an insect down the ladder, and there is no one to tell me when the ocean will begin. First the air is blue, and then it is bluer, and then green, and then black. I am blacking out, and yet my mask is powerful. It pumps my blood with power. The sea is another story. The sea is not a question of power. I have to learn alone to turn my body without force in the deep element. And now, it is easy to forget what I came for among so many who have always lived here, swaying their crenellated fans between the reefs, and besides, you breathe differently down here. I came to explore the wreck. The words are purposes. The words are maps. I came to see the damage that was done and the treasures that prevail. I stroked the beam of my lamp slowly along the flank of something more permanent than fish or weed. The thing I came for, the wreck and not the story of the wreck, the thing itself and not the myth, the drowned face always staring towards the sun, the evidence of damage worn by salt and sway in this threadbare beauty, the ribs of the disaster curving their assertion among the tentative haunters. This is the place, and I am here, the mermaid whose dark hair streams black, the merman in his armored body. We circle silently about the wreck. We dive into the hold. I am she, I am he, whose drowned face sleeps with open eyes, whose breasts still bear the stress, whose silver, copper, vermeil cargo lies obscurely inside barrels, half wedged and left to rot. We are the half-destroyed instruments that once held to a course, the water-eaten log, the fouled compass. We are, I am, you are, by cowardice or courage, the one who find our way back to this scene, carrying a knife, a camera, a book of myths in which our names do not appear. We're going to begin at the opening corner here. I kind of have two different divergent paths that set out in this room. And this room was really fundamental for me in getting an idea of how the works would converse amongst themselves and to each other and raise questions or have similarities. So the two works here that we see, we have this Elad Lasry Desert from 2010, which is a silver gelatin print with a wooden frame. And then below it, Nick Lowe's Night with Shield in Black Woods from 2009 to 2010. India ink on paper with archival linen tape. Now in choosing these two works, I was originally working off very small images, so I was looking purely for images that kind of gave me a sense of unease, uncertainty, brought into conflict, anxiety, questions. And for me, they represented two different modes of travel and potential for travel. Here you see the knight with sword. If you look closely and see how the tape is applied, you can see that he has been placed in at least two other areas to his left where he has traveled from. So it's a very intricate, involved piece. I urge you all to kind of get close and look at it when you have a chance. And then above that, we have this wonderful photographic reproduction from Elad Lasry. And as I note in my introductory statement to this show, there was a great quote that Ron told me. He said, "Imagine yourself on a featureless plain, alone, then dig deeper." And so that really resonated with me. And when I came across this desert image, it was a no-brainer for me to include it. So kind of creating oppositional but related views as a way, an entrance into the show itself. So I'll turn it over to Ron.
Dylan Thomas, in opening his one of his poems, said, "To begin at the beginning." So we are at the beginning, and as the metaphor that has now come up over and over again is journey. We are already started on a journey, and that's what soul does. Soul, the mode of soul is through change, and our metaphor for change is journey. Now we'll have another metaphor. And when we get into alchemy, and we'll have the metaphor of cooking as bringing about change. But for right now, we are talking about the journey. So let me introduce the term archetype. Archetype is a word that in its etymological roots means first stamp, original stamp. The archetype then is that image that is in all of our psyches, many images, but it is that particular image that is universal across cultures and throughout time. It has this similar kind of meaning for the human soul. So we can think in terms then that when we are starting out, we are in an archetypal mode of beginning, and that in mythology, that archetypal mode is brought about by the call from without, that we hear, that the soul hears something that says, it's time to get up, it's time to wake up, it's time to get moving, it's time to change, it's time to, the time is now. So we've got images of this beginning, and this first one here with the knight in front of the black forest brings to mind one of the most famous beginnings of journeys in literature, and that is Dante's journey into the underworld, where he comes to the gate and says, where the gate says, abandon hope, all ye who enter. And that is really something that is part of all journey, is that it is a way of abandoning hope from what was and opening ourselves up to what can be.
So this is Naked Arrest by Urs Fischer, and the date is 2014. It's a bronze work. Obviously you can tell if you walk around it and kind of figure out its moving parts. It was composed by pressing huge bags of clay up against a wall, and actually if you look closely you can see the imprint of an outlet here in the bottom. And it's a wonderful, whimsical work, but it's also somewhat confrontational, and I wanted to set up the viewer being in opposition to the work as soon as they enter the door. So kind of bookending it with Houseago's boy, and kind of knowing that some incident had occurred. A naked hippie is being ushered out by an authority figure in cuffs with a gun, and something has happened. You're not privy as to which or what. And just the kind of almost primal aspects of all the rendering with the tracing of the fingers, and that has lots of kind of echoes in terms of making and ringing back to childhood and kind of basic ways of making form. So I knew that I had to include it as soon as I saw this work, and I thought it was something that would be really great to kind of welcome the viewer into the space.
So remember what we said about the soul. The soul always works in paradox. So as soon as the call is heard, what is the reaction to that? Resistance. No, you can't go. There are reasons why not to go. You can't get out of bed. You're too tired. You can't get moving. The car won't start. Laurel and Hardy had an entire film of trying to get the car going on a trip, and one thing after another would happen so that they couldn't get going on the trip. So resistance, there's the call, and then there's resistance to the call. Okay, let's go into the...
We're going to go into the Art Sanctuary, which is the permanent installation of the 6 David Salle paintings. This was a commission work by David Salle from 2014, I believe. And This was actually the impetus for me approaching the show the way that I did, because every time I would bring a group in here to describe Jungian thought and archetypes, and it's actually better now because usually it's an echo chamber. You would have maybe 10 people, 15 people, and they would just bombard me with questions and spout out things, and I didn't know enough to really give them a concise entry point to archetypes and Jungian thought. So inevitably, we would kind of let the conversation disband and we would slowly file out. But this was my access point. This was the lens by which that I chose to view the collection. So it's important that it's a commission. It's important that it's permanent. And it was my way to approach the Anatomy of Disquiet.
And we need this kind of space to approach the Anatomy of Disquiet, because this is a sanctuary, and in Jungian terminology, we would call it a temenos, a sacred space. The soul needs a space that is separated off from the outside world, from the usual way of thinking, from the usual way of doing things. The soul needs a space for something different to happen, and that can connect all of the aspects of soul, spirit and matter, and all together, and can come together in that kind of space. Now, this is in the shape of a tower. Jung himself famously built his own tower of stone, where he would go to think and to commune with nature, but also to have an affair with his mistress, who after using his wife's family money to buy the stone to build the tower, so you see, everything is included in soul. Now, let's talk about mythology. So I said that one of the languages of the soul is myth. Myth, again, we have a problem in modern times, because we think of myth as being that which is not real, that which is false. But another way of looking at myth is that myth in its pure form, or its original form, is exactly the opposite. It's that which is pure truth. It is the story of the archetypes, the narrative of the archetypes, again, that each of us carry in our psyche. And so the Greeks had used myth to formulate their sense of different archetypes, and they did that through the idea that different energy forms were divinities. Divinities at work in them and outside of them, divinities at work in the world itself. And so we'll talk about some of these divinities as archetypal forms, archetypal worlds that universally the human psyche finds itself in at different times throughout time and again across cultures. So we'll start with this figure here. This is Jupiter, who is the king of the gods, and Jupiter stands for power and justice. And the thing about Jupiter is that he, like Jung, also had affairs. In fact, he had thousands of affairs. But with each of his affairs, something came out of it. He would come down to earth or cohabit with the goddesses, and there would be an offspring that would come from that. In other words, when there is a crossing of the line, a crossing of the border, something happens. Something comes out of it. So then we move over to Aphrodite. Of course, we all know Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, of eros. She is the goddess of connection. Her metal is copper, and of course, copper is the conductor. She is also, though, known as Aphrodite of the grave. She has a dark side to her, as we all know from problematic love affairs. The next god is Hermes. Hermes is the trickster god. Hermes started life by stealing, in its first day of life, stealing his brother Apollo's cattle. And he, in fact, the Greeks, again, had a good sense of soul, so they had a god for every human act, and Hermes was the god of theft, the god of deception, even the god of sneezes, that which happens right now. He is the god that finds the kairos, the exact moment and the exact place to get through the fence, to get across the border, to get where he needs to go. He is the guide of souls into the underworld. And he is also the inventor of the lyre. Now you can play with words there, L-I-A-R. That is for sure about Hermes. And in justifying himself to Apollo, when Apollo accuses him of taking his cattle, he says, I wasn't just born, do you think I was just born yesterday? You know, I wouldn't take your cattle. Well, he was born yesterday and he did take the cattle. Next goddess is Athena. She is the daughter of Zeus, and that's another aspect of this, is that all of these archetypes, all of these divinities are in relationship to others. None of them stand by themselves. So as soon as you're talking about one, another god or another archetype is evoked. Athena was born out of the head of her father, Zeus, over here. He had a headache and he got the blacksmith god, Hephaestus, to come with a big hammer and wedge and give him a crack on the head, and out popped Athena. And the first thing she did was emit a war call, a yell. She is a warrior goddess, but her kind of war is not like Ares, the god of war. Ares was full of rage and fury and going into battle with his sword flying. Athena is the warrior goddess who figures out what is the right mode, what is the right way to do this. Let's strategize and do it right. So she is a goddess of wisdom, and the owl there is her symbol. She is also the divinity that is the patroness of cities, civilization. Apollo, again, brother of Hermes, and is the god of rationality, of enlightenment, he is known as the far distant one. He stands back and observes. He is also god of healing, and you can see the caduceus there. The caduceus is a staff with wings and serpents, so that you get a sense of the staff being the kind of the grounded rationality, whereas the serpents are the ground of rationality organizes the irrational forces of the serpents. And as well, there's the wings as well to bring a kind of spiritual sensibility to the emblem. So Apollo is the god of reason, the god of, let's stand back and observe. He is the god of science, you might say, with the distant observer, gathering the data and coming to a reasoned response to things. His sister is Artemis. She is the goddess of the hunt, and there's the reindeer there. The bear is also her animal. Her symbol is the bow. She is the one who is bright-eyed and clear-eyed, has a bright-eyed, clear-eyed sense of where the target is. She is also a far distant one, like her brother Apollo. She loves the hunt in the woods. She has her cohort of maidens that follow her, and they delight in going off by themselves in hunting and shooting, and getting the exact right answer, but from outside the realm of the communal realm. The communal realm is Athena's realm. Artemis is the virgin god, untouched and outside of that. So you get that's a quick sampling of what we mean by archetypes and what we mean by the sacred space. Another way of thinking about aspects of the soul.
So this juxtaposition, we have both this wonderful Warhol Knives painting, which is from 1981 to 82, and then we have the Ed Ruscha, which is entitled Voice Box from 1987. Again, there's a lot of compositional elements that are pretty easily recognizable. They both have very powerful imagery. So one of the ideas in juxtaposing images, but also making this exhibition very visually dense, is to see how that ultimately changes when a work could stand alone in a wall, but when it's forced to reconcile with something right next to it, what conversation it opens up, what confrontation is there, how the two works maybe ultimately change their meaning by being so close on the same wall in the same room.
Okay, mythology and alchemy are age-old, but another field of thought really lends itself to what we're talking about here tonight in terms of interaction, and that is a cutting-edge form of science called complexity theory. And in complexity theory, which has to do pretty much with subatomic particles, the idea is that you cannot measure anything just in and of itself. The only thing that you can do is to guess what a probability is in terms of its relationship to another particle. But that all particles are always interacting all the time, so that, for example, they've been able to do scientific research that shows that a particle, subatomic particle, in one place, in exactly the same moment, a mile and a half away, there's another particle that is operating in exact conjunction with that particle. So you have the sense that if that can happen from, on the subatomic level, what is the limit to that? You get a sense of that all particles are in some kind of cosmic dance with other particles that can be as far away as, another galaxy. So again, that the importance of the idea of interrelationship here as a part of the a way of talking about soul. Now, what comes to mind for me with this picture is slicing. First of all, it's very much reminiscent of a painting by David, in which 3 or 4 soldiers are all gathered around holding their swords up to form a point. So already you get a sense that there's a container here already formed by what is separating, and there is a point. There's a movement towards a point. So you have a unity and separation both at the same time. So then we have to think in terms of that whenever there's a separation, when a separation of any kind occurs, a divorce, slicing the bread, separating from the family, leaving work in the afternoon, whenever there's a kind of separation taking place, there's also at the same time a union taking place from a different perspective. Now, separatio, or first of all, let me say some more about alchemy here. The alchemists, and this is where it kind of lends itself to our thinking about the gods, because the alchemists thought of, well, first of all, it's a enterprise that has always been kind of below the surface of the mainstream culture and Western tradition. And what it does is it blends philosophy, that is a way of thinking, and practice, a way of doing, blends it together so that the library and the kitchen in alchemy go hand in hand. It is also a blend of the rational, this is what you do, these are the procedures that you follow, and the irrational, the fantastic. Take the urine of the lizard or the old king and grind up the old king and into ashes. Fantastic kind of imagery that we get now all the time in our movies. But it takes those two, the fantastic as seriously as the rational. Now, so the way the alchemists start is they say, in the earth, there are seeds from all the different planets. Like I said, for Venus, for example, it's copper. For Saturn, it's lead. Jupiter, tin. And what alchemists do is they take whatever is in front of them, the matter that's in front of them, and they say, okay, this is the prima materia. This is the beginning, like the beginning of the journey. This is what needs to be worked on. And so then they find a container, a vase or a vessel, like our tower there, a sacred space in which the work can be done, separated off from what's going on around it. And then they have different procedures, like one is to apply a solution, a solutio. Another is to apply heat through fire, calcinatio. And one is separation. The slice in one of the alchemical images is the alchemist with the sword above the cosmic egg, the world, the egg that represents the cosmos, ready to slice it in two. So there's always a sense of, in the soul, that there is a possibility, a fundamental possibility of separation that is going to be taking place at some point.
So here we have Jim Shaw's Dream Object, a large hand-drawn comic on raw, unstretched canvas from 1995, acrylic. And in seeing this, obviously you're making instant connections to popular culture with Peanuts comics, and then you start to get into the text. And if you read through it, it is so dense in thought and vocabulary that you have to find your way out, and you're not really, at least for me, it takes a few times to read through it to actually realize what you've read. I remember showing this to my son, who's quite busy in making his own comics, and he had no idea how to approach it. And then the other work that we're talking about is another photograph by Ann Collier, which is entitled Open Book Number 10, Lips, from 2014, another Cibachrome print image.
Okay, so again, this is just to make note of the connections here, how the lips are right across from, in the book, are right across from Cheryl Teague's lips and her kind of model's face. And the difference here in terms of how one is drawn into the lips, just like one is drawn into the book, with the sense of that words are ready to be coming out. There's a sense of premonition that something is about ready to happen. A sense of mystery about that, about words and lips. And that is reflected over here then with an entire art piece made up of many, 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 many words. Now, one way to think about words is that each word itself has its own life, its own subjectivity, and that what happens in conversation is that it's not that we are conversing with somebody, but that words are conversing with the words around them. In fact, the words have their histories, have their etymologies, and in their roots, they often have entirely opposite meanings, like the word pharmakon, which has to do with a healing drug, also means a poison. So that it's as if words have us. I mean, that's another way of thinking about how soul works, is that whatever it is we think we have, like a conversation or a house or a god or a word, it's actually from the standpoint of the unconscious that they have us. They are organizing us and kind of moving us along.
This is an earlier work by Nicole Eisenman entitled Divers from 1998, oil on canvas, and she's also the artist who's positioned directly across the way, entitled Blue Night. Okay,
another alchemical operation is called conjunctio, conjunction, and the images for that have to do with the king and the queen fornicating, coming together, literally and figuratively, so to speak. Conjunctio is getting it together, bringing things that have been apart together in an erotic way, and getting it together, bringing things together. And this painting reminded me of the temples of Khajuraho in India, in which you have an entire temple that is covered with layers of friezes that have to do with all the different kinds of all the different sexual positions, all the different combinations of humans and animals, humans and plant, animals, and so on. And I wanted to read you this description from a philosopher, Al Lingus, from his book Excess. Could one imagine an eroticism that would spread everywhere, involve all the domains of high culture, and not be a contagion of misery, not be driven by frustration? An eroticism that would sensualize the mind in its quest for the truth of the real, that would infect the political order, that would intensify through artifices and in art, and that would be nowhere dissimulated or dissimulating, but discover its climactic intensity in the most sublime forms. Then he goes on to say, to describe this temple. The abstract geometry embraces within itself layer upon layer of friezes where what seems to be a universal combination of carnal positions is brought to the same explicitness and precision. Autoerotic stimulation, dual and multiple cunnilinktio, penilinctio, copulation, homosexual and bestial intercourse circulate about the temple walls without primacy of place or of artistry given to any figure. The dissymmetry of the sexes does not become a practice of power and dependency. Penile erection is not generalized into male ascendancy, as in the art that casts secondary gender characteristics, male chest and male musculature, into the image of tumescence, nor does it become the concrete symbol, the very concretion of verticality and value. Khajuraho shows men receiving female initiative, lying upside down beneath women, and the male figure, supple and pliant, coils and breathes rather than hardens into muscular erection or into pillars about which the female would twine, seeking phallic support. And finally he says, here one neither ascends nor descends. One makes love with animals and trees, nor ascends when one makes love with the moon, the rivers, the stars. One travels aimlessly or circularly about a universe eroticized. So here, this sense of diving in, whenever we're kind of diving in, if we can, from the standpoint of conjunctio, if we can imagine that as a sexual act, diving into the idea, diving into the work, diving into the relationship, diving into whatever it is there, is in fact an erotic act from the standpoint of the eroticized mind. As opposed to over here, this the American hero here, who is anything but erotic in his presencing of himself.
I think that's as good a place to stop as any. I would have preferred to stop right before at the erotic part, but I want to thank all of you for coming, and thanks to Dr. Ronald Schenk.
Well, thanks for coming.
It's been a great, thank you. And thanks to Pauline Karpidas and Elizabeth and Panos Karpidas.